I'm making this video to cover another participant in CD Projekt Red's official Witcher 3 modding contest. I have previously covered the winner of the competition, however today I would like to show you another mod which was not among the top 3, but nevertheless it's rather impressive. The mod in question is called The Spider and the Wolf. It adds a new contract for Geralt at the notice board in White Orchard, which seems rather small and simple initially, but then evolves into a wonderful and mysterious side story featuring several brand new characters, multiple meaningful choices, a few hidden scenes that you have to do something special to trigger, a reasonably challenging final boss, and 2 or 3 endings for each of the main quests. According to the authors of the mod, there are over 50 cutscenes with more than 1,500 lines of dialogue, which, based on the fact that I've recorded 4 hours of footage, I'm inclined to believe. But the numbers themselves are not that important. What I find impressive is just how well this mod fits into the game. The initial quest, for example, takes into account the completion of the Griffin contract, the Devil by the Well, the guy who burnt down the Dwarven house, the dead Witcher in the Crypt, Mislav and Florian's relationship, and so on. Also, it adds extra meaning and depth to the remnants of cut content that we can see here and there, like the bloody sacrificial altars during the winter version of White Orchard, or perhaps the creepy occult house. So the new contract blends nicely on a local level, but it also does it globally, because it expands on little pieces of lore that were sprinkled throughout the books and The Witcher 1, specifically about the Church of Coram Agh Ter, or the Cult of Coram Agh Ter, as it's called in The Witcher 1. It is also known as the Cult of the Lion-Headed Spider.
Curse you, White Wolf! I curse all you filthy murderers! I curse you in the name of the Lion-Headed Spider, the Black Legba!
It was, however, first mentioned in The Last Wish, which is the first Witcher book. In there, Nivellen was cursed to become a monster by a priestess. However, it was not just any priestess, it was a priestess of Coram Agh Ter. And the new quests here do a great job of expanding the lore behind the cult a little bit, and I love it. However, most of all, I believe that the mod fits because of the manner in which it was written. There was genuine effort here to make the dialogue feel like a natural part of The Witcher 3. Different characters, for example, have different vocabulary. They structure their sentences in unique ways, and it is all very similar to the style of the rest of the game. So whether it's northern peasants, Geralt himself, a bunch of bandits, a dwarf and an elf, or the enigmatic guy with the mask, they all sound believable, like you would expect them to, and I love it. What's more, the creators of this mod, as far as I can tell, are not native English speakers, because both of them are in fact fellow Bulgarians. Sadly, unlike their French and Russian colleagues, they have not written any native wisdom in their about pages, but I suppose I can tell you their names at least. The two gentlemen are called Daniel Yordanov, aka DYX, and Alexander Rashkov, aka Beoronic. I had the pleasure of talking to Mr. DYX while playing through the mod. I left a healthy amount of feedback, I found a handful of bugs, some of which may be addressed soon if they're not addressed already by the time this video comes out, and generally, I love what they've done. Now, what about downsides, you may ask? Well, there is one potentially massive downside, which will differ from person to person, but the mod has no voice acting. There are cutscenes and animation and everything else, but due to the sheer size of the script and the fact that all of it was developed by 2 people in a limited time, there is no voice acting and you have to read the subtitles. Now you may be asking, why isn't there an AI-generated voiceover? Well, AI was against the rules of the contest, so it wasn't even an option during development. I suppose it can be added now, however the creators are not really keen on the idea. On one hand, they are reluctant about the ethical side of it, and on the other, that it might butcher the dialogue, which I think is entirely possible given the occasional hiccups we've seen in Essie Daven's mod.
Hello, Geralt.
Geralt.
And as for genuine voice acting, that too is quite the challenge. Not only is there a lot of dialogue, but it's also well written and it needs a high quality voice to do it justice.
3 years they bumped about under my nose, then ran off! My granda told it right! Not a bloke out there doesn't want to get between a dwarf wench's trotters!
I suppose it can still be done by fans, but it will require some genuine effort. Now, with all that said, I should also add that at no point did I feel a real need for AI voices. It would have been wonderful to have voice acting of the same quality as the rest of the game, but even with subtitles alone, I was able to picture their voices in my mind as I was reading the dialogue. Okay, I suppose I've talked for quite a bit and haven't really gotten into the specifics of the story yet. Now, the mod is quite long, but I will try my best to give you a brief and summarized walkthrough of the story with some of the cool details I encountered. The installation is quite simple, just place the contents of the mods and DLC folders into your own, and that's it. The recommended level is 17+, and the only requirement is that you've already arrived in Velen. Alright, now for the actual story. We head back to White Orchard. A little boy along the way tells us that it's raining, it's pouring, Emperor Emir is snoring, he bumped his head when he went to bed, and wet himself come morning. We finally reach the notice board and the mod begins as we are approached by a young man named Branek. He says he has a monster problem and very much requires our help. Meanwhile, Geralt immediately notices that he's not from around here, and we find out that he is from Vizima. He claims that he decided to invest in a piece of land here, but soon we discover that he is in White Orchard not because it's good for business, but primarily because he fell in love with a local woman. So the two got married, and now that the griffin is gone, they even bought some cattle. However, despite the griffin being gone, all of the cows were slaughtered last night. So we take the contract and begin our investigation, while Branek remains in the village to ask around for some more information. We can optionally meet his wife. They live in the outskirts by the fields. Her name is Anezka, and she's tending to their sunflower patch. We can learn a little more about their relationship, which appears to be genuine, and she also claims that she heard people near their fences last night, not a monster. Then, we proceed to where the cows were slaughtered. We find deep claw marks.
Claw marks, long and sharp.
Footprints, as well as paw prints nearby, and it definitely seems like a werewolf.
A werewolf.
Or a fellow YouTuber. But the wolf and human tracks are side by side, and there are more human tracks too, and it looks very suspicious. Meanwhile, off to the side, we can find a set of hoof prints as well, which unlock an optional objective, and if we follow it, we can find one of their cows, which had apparently run away and survived last night's encounter. We can return it to Anezka if we manage to protect it from the nearby bear.
Bear! Run, you stupid piece of shit!
And as a hidden objective, once again, we can visit her husband, tell him about the rescued cow, and get a small bonus reward. We then go back and continue the investigation, eventually reaching a clearing deeper into the forest, full of all sorts of creepy stuff. There are effigies, a bloody altar, animal bodies arranged in a circle. We investigate some more and it all seems quite strange. We realize that the werewolf tracks are a little smaller than usual. We find a fancy piece of torn clothing, and if we sense a certain optional trail to follow, we can also find a letter on a dead body, which suggests that the dead person was hired to bring corpses of all kinds of animals to the circle. Then suddenly a chort appears out of nowhere and then disappears the same way before we manage to kill him, which has got to be a reference to the Bovine Defense Force. You know, that chort in White Orchard who appears if we slaughter a bunch of defenseless cows. And so we go back to share our findings. And there is a nice and unique scene if we try to report to the family in the middle of the night. Geralt catches the couple sleeping and decides not to wake them up. So he eats some apples until the sun comes out, and we reunite in the morning. Branek says he hasn't learned anything from the village, and we have evidence of both werewolves and human occult activity, but not much else. Luckily, Anezka recognizes the fancy piece of clothing we found. She thinks it may actually belong to a friend of hers, an old widow named Julia, who is something of a local tailor. She and Anezka do their laundry at the nearby lake, and we hatch a plan to have Anezka distract Julia so we can sneak into the house and look for more clues. Along the way to the lake, Anezka will make a detour because she wants to stay away from the village that is being haunted by the ghost of Claire. That, if you recall, is the devil by the well, and the conversation differs based on whether we've completed the contract. Eventually, we reach the lake, the two women start talking, and we head to the house in secret. Before we reach it, we meet a group of children who play with a Nilfgaardian dummy. Apparently, the old lady had made it for them, and they even call her Gran or Granny. It's a little reminiscent of the encounter with the children of the crones. What's more, they also ask you to play a game with them, which is to throw balls under this stone gate, monument, whatever it is, without hitting the dummy in the middle. Honestly, it's harder than it seems, at least until you find the right angle, and eventually we reach the house. Inside there are some suspiciously high quality materials, too expensive for a local tailor, as well as a letter, suggesting that the old lady is working with someone, or a group of people rather, who wish to clear the cemetery for some reason and take over it essentially. On our way out, even one of the small children mentions that the old lady planned on meeting someone at the cemetery. What's more, a moment later we see the same exact child playing with the others as if nothing had happened, almost as if it never spoke to Geralt a moment ago. So something is definitely off. Now, additionally, there is a hidden scene here. It happens if we decide to meditate inside the house, despite agreeing that we shall act quickly while Anezka distracts the woman. In that case, Julia eventually returns home and catches Geralt meditating on the ground and just kicks him out of the house. She then locks the door, and if we look through the window, we can even see her physically barring it by standing right next to it. So in that case, we head back without any information, but along the way, a mysterious man appears. He is rather cryptic, and he makes fun of Geralt for deciding to take a nap at the old lady's house, which annoys the Witcher, but the man seems to know what we're after, somehow, and he points us to the cemetery. There are definitely some Gaunter or Dim vibes coming from him, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. We can then report back to the young family. In fact, this is optional if we failed to investigate the house properly. Anezka would be quite confused as to what happened, but we will not admit the truth and simply say that we have a reason to believe that the cemetery is the next step. And if we did find the information and followed the plan properly, we would return together with Anezka and suggest that old Julia is also part of this cult-like group, since she is supplying them with clothes and whatnot. Now, at the cemetery, we can find something new next to Florian's grave: an empty bottle and a tear-stained note. Upon reading it, we can figure out that Mislav came here, likely drunk, and wrote a letter to Florian. It is also likely that he contemplated killing himself, but ultimately decided against it. It is quite sad, since, when you think about it, Mislav must lead a pretty solitary and difficult life, being shunned from the village for so long. Inside the crypt, we find more blood, similar to the one we found on the previous ritual site.
Dried blood. Really old. The singeing, on the other hand, is fresh. Unnatural. Medallion vibrates near it.
And as we exit, the bald guy shows up again. The dialogue is different based on what happened in the house, since if we did find the information, this is the first time we ever see him. He jokes about our dead colleague inside, you know, the Viper School Witcher. Then he sort of reveals that he is working with someone who would also like to have these cultists dealt with. And that's why he's helping us, because supposedly we have mutual interest. So he tells us that now that the cemetery is clear, the cult plans on taking it to perform their evil rituals here, and he helps us set up an ambush. So at the right place and time, we hide, and eventually a group of people arrives. There are a few Nilfgaardian soldiers apparently leading them, but there are local peasants with them too, as well as a group of bandits, and it looks like they have captured someone. Some of them start praying, and they are about to perform a ritual. We can either interrupt them or wait and see what happens. There is a lot of variation here. I'm not even sure if I've seen it all. In fact, I'm looking forward to comments from the authors in case I miss or misrepresent anything. But here's what I've seen. If you wait and see what happens, the leader of the Nilfgaardians, perhaps a mage, orders one of the other soldiers to murder the captive. Then he starts performing a ritual which causes him to draw power from the blood or from the dead body or something, and he turns into a werewolf. It's a different werewolf model too, apparently one that is in the game but is not used. He senses Geralt and we start fighting. When he drops to 50% health, he runs to the nearby place of power and starts draining it. Meanwhile, we have to kill all of the bandits and Nilfgaardians. The peasants, they stay away and continue praying the whole time. Afterwards, we interrupt the werewolf with Ard and continue fighting until about 25%, when he runs over and kills one of the peasants, becoming even stronger. I think he even transforms a little. And by the way, speaking of the peasants, if we approach them during the fight, it's kind of hard to see, but from the right angle, we can discover that Julia is indeed among them. Her character is called Granny. So eventually, we kill the werewolf, the peasants just leave, I assume, and the mysterious man shows up again. In another form this time. And here, it is revealed that he is actually a Doppler. In fact, he was also that suspicious child which appeared earlier, and Geralt himself will even figure it out if he has met the child. But we do not learn much more from the Doppler, other than mostly cryptic dialogue. Then we return to the couple, we tell them what happened, and that hopefully it should all be fine now. They seem happy, they promise a reward, but they need another day to properly prepare it. So we wait, until suddenly somebody sets their house on fire in the middle of the night and bars them inside. We rush to their aid, and you know me. The first thing I did was meditate in front of their door until they burn to death. Next morning, we can find the charred remains of their bodies inside the burned house, lots of other people gathered in front, and to make things even worse, we can even pretend that we don't know who they are. And yes, I did that too. But we can indeed break down the door and save them. The woman will be badly burned and injured, but they both survive. The next morning, they can be seen leaving White Orchard, heading back towards Vizima, since they no longer feel safe here. So they leave, but not before giving us the reward, which is the silver sword of the witcher who died in the crypt. And not just that, but it has a scabbard made of cow leather. It's in black and white, which, as far as scabbards go, is quite unique. All this is if we don't interrupt the ritual. Here's what can change if we do interrupt it. We step out of the shadows and the Nilfgaardians send the bandits to fight us. And it seems here that the Nilfgaardians and the peasants are indeed part of the cult, while the bandits are not. They just work for them. And there are a few things we can do. First off, we can threaten them into submission. They will hesitate quite a bit, but ultimately they decide to fight. Except for this one guy with the mask. He decides against it and runs away instead. Remember him because he will be relevant soon. We can also decide to fight the bandits straight up, in which case things turn out similarly to what happens if we don't interrupt the ritual. Now, remember back when we investigated the creepy circle? There was a scent we could follow and optionally discover a dead body with a note. It had instructions to kill animals and bring them to the circle and so on. It turns out that the body belonged to one of their companions, and we can use that information to persuade them not to fight, because the people who hired them don't really care about their lives and they may end up just like the dead man. In this case, they will actually join us against the Nilfgaardians and the werewolf, and after we defeat them, we will have the option to either fight the bandits once again or persuade them to go to the Nilfgaardians and tell them what happened here, hoping that the young family might be compensated for all the damage they suffered. So the bandits are not thrilled by the suggestion. They think the Black Ones will simply hang them, but Geralt says that it's either that or the steel sword, so they agree. Then, once again, we head back to the family. The same thing happens as before. they're happy, they promise a reward, their house is set on fire, and if they survive, we can find them soon afterwards still in White Orchard, because it seems that the ruling Nilfgaardians have appointed the bandits to help the family, to rebuild their house and get back on their feet. So the young couple decides to remain and continue their lives as before. The woman, however, is injured for the time being, so she now rests while her husband tends to the sunflowers. We get the sword too, and as far as I can tell, this is the best ending of the first quest. There are a couple more variations though. Remember how we can fight the bandits, but one of them runs away? Well, in that case, he alone can be seen assisting the young couple if they survive. He turns out to be a decent man, however, his help alone is not enough, because even with him present, they still decide to abandon this place. And I believe he's also the one who lets us know that their house is on fire in the middle of the night. One more detail before we move on to the second quest: there is a unique scene if we persuade the bandits to join us against the cultists, then decide to fight them afterwards, and then run away from the fight. This time around, the Doppler will appear at a different location and make fun of us for running away. With that, I believe we're done with the first quest. And just as we think about leaving White Orchard, a Nilfgaardian officer approaches us with a letter. It is written by someone named H, who is apparently a high-standing Nilfgaardian. It is both cryptic and poetic, and it looks like he wishes to help us strike at the heart of this cult. So we go to this lonely hill at sunset, and waiting for us there is a man dressed in black, wearing a hood and a mask, and it seems like he may be the Doppler we met. But that's not the case. Now I should say that this here is definitely the longest cutscene in the entire mod. 10 minutes plus, I believe, if you go through all the optional dialogue. I will, however, try to summarize it for you, even though it's not easy to do so, because despite all the dialogue, he is rather secretive and never fully reveals anything. But based on what we learn, it definitely seems that he is Nilfgaardian, probably a member of some secret service, covert organization type of thing, and he wants to cleanse these lands from the cult. He believes the cult will thrive as the conflict between Nilfgaard and the North escalates, and he wants to deal with it before the Empire finally conquers these lands. We learn a bit more about the cult too. It seems the members of it can be people from all walks of life. They have usually had contact with death, loss, or tragedy in some ways. They also worship a god that we don't know much of, and they usually offer sacrifices to him or her in exchange for different boons and powers. And we did see that the guy at the cemetery really was infused by some forces as a result of the sacrifice. So perhaps there is some truth to all of this. It also seems that different groups, or rather cells as they're called, naturally form at different places as the worshippers find each other and start gathering in secret. The man also mentions that the local cell here at White Orchard is nothing special, but the one around Novigrad should not be underestimated. We learn that the Doppler, whose real name is Janus, quite fitting, works for the man, and he has been keeping track of Geralt on his behalf. Geralt gets suspicious when he hears that, because he doubts that a Doppler would agree to such a job. But the man never reveals how he has persuaded Janus, only that he has his ways. Ultimately, he gets to the heart of the matter and why exactly he needs Geralt's help. It turns out that one of his agents, by the name of Carilla, has been kidnapped, and he suspects the cult is behind it. She was initially sent to Novigrad as a Nilfgaardian diplomat, but secretly she was negotiating with the gangs of the city and providing aid to the non-humans on behalf of Nilfgaard. This was not an act of altruism, but rather an attempt to ensure that once the Empire reaches the city, the non-human population, as well as the criminals, will side with Nilfgaard. However, she has gone missing. And in fact, the masked man had sent another one of his agents to investigate the matter, but he has also stopped reporting. And now he has resorted to asking us for help, hoping that Geralt's desire to rid the North of this cult, as well as the promise of a large reward, will be enough. we agree and head to the village of Aret, where the second agent was last stationed. This is right next to Novigrad. The agent had chosen to disguise himself as a blacksmith here, but it seems he's rather terrible at it, and it has only got him into trouble with the locals. Apparently he botched their swords or something, and they are out for revenge. Luckily we can save him. The scene is reminiscent of the one where we saved the Peller from the Baron's men. Then the encounter with the spy is rather brief. Apparently he has managed to track down the general location of the cult and points us in the right direction. He mentions that he has been to the house of the missing woman and found evidence of the cult's involvement. He also insists that there is nothing else to be found there and we shouldn't concern ourselves with this house. And indeed, visiting her house is an optional objective, but naturally we have to go, so we head to the outskirts of the city, where the non-humans live, and we stumble upon an argument between an elf, a dwarf, and a handful of bandits. The dwarf is really well written, and of course his sharp tongue escalates things, but we get there in time to save him and the elf. The two recognize Geralt. The dwarf even says that he was at Flotsam during the events of The Witcher 2. We asked them about the woman, and they say she lives nearby. Apparently she was blonde and beautiful, and the dwarf even had an eye on her, it seems. So we enter the house, and there are indeed signs of struggle. We find letters and documents that confirm her identity, but we also find a couple of peculiar items. A medallion with Melitele depicted on it, which is an unusual thing for a Nilfgaardian to wear, and also a small mirror with the crest of Ilander on the back of it. This is where the Temple of Melitele is in the books. It's where Mother Neneka lives. And what's more, hidden under the floorboards we find her journal, where the first and the second half of the entries seem quite different stylistically, almost as if a different person wrote each half. So once again, it's quite suspicious, but that's all we learn, and we proceed to track down the cult. As we exit the house, however, Janus the Doppler shows up again, and he's not happy about the fact that we strayed away from the trail to investigate this place. We can even try to Axie him here, but even though he doesn't seem too strong-willed, the Axie doesn't do anything. Geralt is mildly surprised, but there's not much to be done, so we tell him to begone and plow himself and continue the search for the cult. There are several trails we can follow. One of them leads to an upstanding citizen relieving himself in the forest. The other one leads to a group of halflings, one of whom has lost his ring. Both their lines and Geralt's comments here are a funny little reference to Lord of the Rings. Even their names are Frodo, Samwell, Perry, and Mippin. One of the authors told me that they plan on adding a small event similar to the one in Blood and Wine, in the Royal Gardens where you can find the ring down the river. At any rate, eventually we get on the right track and begin following the cultists. But suddenly we find this charred ground and signs of a fight. We can't really say what happened, but not far from here we find a woman who is looking for help because her lover has been injured. Unfortunately, there is nothing we can do for him. We learn that they were headed to the large tree nearby, which is their usual meeting spot, but then something that looked like a living corpse came at them. It stabbed the man and ran away, for some reason completely ignoring the woman. It's unclear why she was spared, but for the time being, we leave her to her grief and continue. Eventually, we stumble upon this grotesque creature called Cursed Being. We fight, we kill it, and we can't really figure out what it is, only that it has this creepy, severed hand as a medallion. Now, just as I mentioned during my coverage of Essi Daven's mod, I immediately thought it's going to be something about demonic possession and Goetia. However, it still isn't. One of the authors actually admitted that they had initially planned on making the story about demons and Goetia, but later changed their minds in favor of the cult of Coram Agh Ter. At any rate, it seems the creature was drawn to these rocks here, and upon further investigation, they appear to be an illusion, and it reveals a hidden house. Inside, we find two skeletons, likely those of the owners, killed in the bed and the tub, and the whole place has been transformed into a sanctuary for the cult, or so it seems. There is even a stone gargoyle. Eventually, we find what looks like a riddle. There is a circle of candles and a skull with a bloody handprint on it, as well as a note which says that we should show our devotion before touching the skull. It turns out that showing devotion means bleeding ourselves, and I actually struggled quite a lot here initially. There are 3 ways to do it, but all 3 can be somewhat evasive. One is to injure yourself on the gargoyle's hand. This can be tricky because you have to stand at the right place and angle to properly interact with it, and also if you touch the skull immediately, the gargoyle comes to life, and that option is no longer available. The second thing you can do is use the knife on the table. However, in order to use it, you have to interact with it twice. The third option is to dip your hand into this tub full of blood. And that, by the way, is hidden. It doesn't seem interactable. And the problem for me here is that with RTX disabled, it kind of looks like water from most angles, not blood. At any rate, eventually we complete the ritual and a portal opens. It sends us to a cave, which is full of cultists. They want us dead, we kill them, we go deeper, and we finally find the woman we were looking for. However, she is unconscious and held in a cage. We have a brief conversation with the man who looks like their leader. He wears some nifty war paint. Then he casts a spell on a skull nearby, and that turns his followers into skeletons. It's quite cool, actually. Not only do they transform, but just like the wraiths in that cyberpunk secret room, the skeletons are immortal, and in order to kill them, we need to break the skull, which the leader used to cast the spell. So we break it, they revert back to human forms. I'm not sure whether this was an illusion or something, but whatever it is, they can now be killed. However, the leader spawns a golem and teleports out. So we save the lady and bring her back to the creepy house until she wakes up. And just like the rest of the mod, something about her is immediately suspicious. The dwarf and the elf said she was a beautiful blonde. Meanwhile, her hair is as black as Fringilla Vigo's. She also has some peculiar scars on her hands, which look like bite marks, which sadly are not visible, at least not on my footage currently, and we can ask a few questions, but she doesn't seem very talkative, and she's rather confused. She says how she failed the man who sent her. She doesn't even really know why the cultist kidnapped her or what they wanted from her, so she's not of much help at all. And at this point, if we haven't properly investigated her house, the only option we have, other than asking all these questions, is to Axie her. However, once again, just like it was with the Doppler, the Axie does not work. Geralt even feels like some unknown force is blocking his signs, but he can't do much else, so he arranges a meeting with the Doppler, who shows up again later that night, along with a couple of Nilfgaardians. He mocks Geralt a little bit, but still gives him a hefty reward of 1,500 crowns. I suppose that's 1 crown for each line of dialogue, and they take Carilla away. Geralt suspects that he may have missed something, but he has other things to tend to, and the mod ends. This is what I would call the bad ending. However, if we have found everything in the house, you get to ask about all the peculiarities in her diary, and to bring up the unusual objects related to Melitele. As you talk about these things, she slowly begins to remember. Little by little, we uncover the whole story. Well, some things remain a mystery still, but we uncover quite a bit. The man with the mask turns out to be a powerful Nilfgaardian mage, but he's a bit of a fanatic too. Apparently, he has secretly founded his own cell of this cult. However, his primary desire is not the well-being of the cult or the spread of this religion, but rather to gain personal power. The power that seems to come from this god that they worship. And so he truly wants to eradicate the other cultists, possibly to steal their knowledge and whatnot, and become even more powerful. Also, his real name is Helfir, or however it's pronounced, and within his occult circle, he is also known as Arachous. Speaking of real names, this woman isn't actually called Carilla either. Carilla is a sort of implanted identity which the mage forced onto her with magic. Originally, she was a priestess at Mother Neneka's temple. That's why among her things we could find Militale's medallion, and that's also why the initial part of her diary felt so different. I suppose later she wore a blonde wig too. Her real name is Merida, and not only was she kidnapped by the mage and placed under this mind-altering spell, but she was also subjected to some sort of terrible ritual involving a whole bunch of little spiders biting her and injecting little bits of venom inside her. Apparently the cult has a history of doing that to rare and gifted women in order to transform them into a superior kind of priestess who gains the ability to commune with their god and stuff like that. So it's a multi-layered deception. She's actually a priestess of Militale who is magically forced to act as a Nilfgaardian diplomat in order to conceal her real purpose, which is to bring the mage with the mask even more power through these occult practices. And it seems that the Novigrad cell of the cult had figured out who and what she is, so they took her, hoping to use her special abilities for themselves. And so by destroying the cell and returning her to the mage, Geralt would have solved both of his issues at once without even knowing. This is of course what happened during the bad ending. Additionally, we solved the mystery with the cursed being, which I actually could not figure out. I even proposed to one of the authors that perhaps another small hint should be dropped somewhere, because it's quite interesting, but a little too obscure in my opinion. So the deal with this creature is that as the cultists were taking Carilla to their creepy house, she managed to curse one of them, similar to how Nivellen was cursed by another priestess of the same cult. However, Carilla's curse turned this man into a slave of sorts, one who is forced to protect her. So he started fighting the rest of the cultists, and it seems that a couple of them died, while the others pressed on, dragging the woman away. And when the cursed man was done fighting, he continued looking for her, but instead stumbled upon the couple of lovers, and mistakenly killed the man, thinking that the woman is the one he was meant to protect. Afterwards, he proceeded towards the creepy house, likely drawn by her influence or something, but he was likely confused by the illusion and just hung around the place until we found him. With all that revealed, we let her rest in the house and arrange a meeting with the Doppler once again, but this time we go there alone. Initially, it seems like the Doppler is the only person attending, but when it becomes clear that we know the truth, the evil mage shows up again. He teleports us into this eerie cave, we fight our way through it. I believe the place is at least partially taken from the new quest in the Devil's Pit, and at last we arrive at a large room with an altar that resembles a spider's web. And of course, the final boss fight begins. As far as I can tell, Arachous is a mixture of the Ophiri mage and Olgierd. Now, I have once fought Olgierd with a small blackjack, so that wasn't too hard, but the Ophiri mage portion caught me off guard. But it's overall a nice fight, it is both challenging and thematic, so eventually we kill him, and that breaks the spell on the Doppler too. Like the priestess, he was also controlled by the mage and essentially forced into another identity. His real name is Kolar, and we part with him on a positive note. Instead of money this time, we get the Sword of Arachous, which is a kind of modified version of Olgierd's Iris, and we leave the mod fully equipped with both a silver and a steel weapon. But not before we send off Merida as well. We can choose whether or not to give her some money. If we do it, we get some extra dialogue referencing Mother Neneka, and generally it's a nice ending scene. And no, there is no romance. Speaking of romance, however, there is something which was bugged when I played it, but it should be fixed by the time this video is out, or soon afterwards. The woman, if you recall, whose lover was killed, has buried him under their tree. If you go there, you can find her crying by his gravestone, and apparently she is meant to say a few lines which are a reference to Attack on Titan. Sadly, I'm not familiar with it, but perhaps some of you are. We get some neat journal entries as well, written of course by Dandelion, and with that, the mod is complete. I wish that the good ending was a little longer. It felt as though things wrapped up rather quickly at the end. However, I understand the creators were a little pressed for time to finish it all before the deadline of the contest, so I can't really blame them. What I can do is wish them luck and thank them very much for making this mod, because it truly left an impression on me, as you can probably tell. And of course, thanks to all of you for watching, especially if you made it all the way to the end. Do check the description for the download links, and until the next video, which will probably be my 10th anniversary details missed episode, stay tuned and be good.